Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So in today's card making video, we're going to be making an underwater or sea themed card, and we're going to be using the gorgeous Speckled Pearls trio inspired by Marion Emberson. This trio has speckled sage, speckled turquoise and speckled egg, and they have a lovely pearlescent finish. And we're going to be combining it with this die set that I've got. This is an older one. It's the Paper Discovery Beyond the Sea die set, and I'm also going to be using an older Paper Craft Society box kit from Made to Surprise because they're the sea themed stamps that I've got in my stash. But you can definitely recreate this with whatever stamps you've got in your stash that are under the water or sea themed with these embossing powders. So I've got my card blank, which is a shop bought 6x6, so it's just a little bit smaller than 6x6 inches. And then I've got a white panel of cardstock for my card front, which is 5.5 inches squared. I've got this circle die and it measures just under 4 inches from cutting line to cutting line across the middle. So that's the kind of proportions that I'm working on today. So first of all, we're just going to tack this in place. I've got some mint tape from scrapbook.com and I'm going to kind of tack it in place roughly as a guide as to where I want the cut line to end. So that's just more of a mental note for me. I'm going to I just want a semicircle so it looks like a bit of a fish bowl type look. So that's what I'm going to do. And I've got my Sizzix Big Shot machine. And I'm just going to show you how you can do partial die cutting if you've not done it before. So when you're cutting plate, you've got like a tapered edge on these Sizzix ones. So the die cutting machine is only going to cut up to the thickest point. So you might be able to just see that there. So at that thickest point, that's where it will cut to. So if you line your plate up over the die to where you want it to cut to, then you'll be able to get that partial die cut. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to run that through my machine now. Just get it all nice and straight. And then you can see that we've just got that partial cut. So when I remove the low tack tape, you'll see exactly what I've done. And this is just a great technique. It's another way of extending your dies really as well. So there you go, we've got that lovely little partial die cut. So just to finish that off, I'm going to grab my metal ruler and a cutting knife. I'm going to use my magnet just to hold that in place. And I'm going to use the grid lines on my glass mat to make sure that I've got a nice straight line. And then I'm just going to use my cutting blade a couple of times to make sure that we've got a nice crisp cut. And then we'll have that lovely partial cut semicircle or fishbowl appearance. So yeah, it's a great little tip and hack of ways to get more from your dies. So next I've got a piece of acetate, and to hold that in place I'm just going to use a little bit of red line tape. I'm using red line tape because it's super sticky and super strong and I know it's going to last. So I'm not worried about covering all of the areas. I just want to make sure that it holds the acetate in place nice and firmly and strong, so it's nice and flush against the window, that there's no kind of bubbles or ripples. But yeah, we're not turning this into a shaker card today, so it hasn't got to be perfectly sealed in any way. I have got a little bit of areas where the red line tape overran the acetate window, so I've just popped a little bit of mint tape on there just for now, just so that it doesn't stick to my desk. Next, I'm just using it to help me work out where I'm going to need to add some ink blending. And I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide in Mermaid Lagoon. And then I've got two Gina K Designs ink pads. One is Turquoise Sea and the lighter one is Sea Glass. So these are dye inks, so they're also water reactive like the Distress Oxide. And I'm just using my blending brush here just to get the ink down. We're not aiming for a perfect ink blend. We just want to get some ink down behind that window to give it that kind of sea water effect. I'm then just going to bring in my distress sprayer, spritz it with a little bit of water, and you can see how those inks react straight away. And then while that's just drying, we can come in with some heat embossing. So I've already gone ahead off camera and die cut some of these elements. So I've got a couple of coral pieces and I'm just using a embossing powder called Hint of Pink. This is from the Pastel Pearls, and so it just adds a very subtle pearlescent sheen of pink to these white die cuts. So yeah, it's very subtle, but it adds a really lovely effect. Now, when I'm heat embossing die cut elements, there's two ways you can do it, and I do alternate between the two. You can die cut the elements first, as I've done today, or you could just coat a panel of cardstock with the embossing powder, heat set that, and then die cut from it. I do sometimes find though that with die cutting after, you can get a little bit of cracking. So I do like to die cut my elements first if I can. And I'm hoping you can see a little bit of that pink sheen there. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but it's very, very subtle and it looks really lovely in real life. I do find when you're heat embossing small die cut elements like these, it can be a little bit fiddly. And so I find using a cork mat helps to dissipate the heat so that you don't get any warping, but it also means that you've got something to kind of stick your tweezers into and really hold the elements in place. What that does mean though is that you kind of have to heat from the top. So especially when you're using powders with chunky bits or glitter, it is going to blow a lot of that off. So another way that you can do that is, as I'm going to show you now, holding the die cut with your tweezers and then heat setting from underneath. So you need to make sure that you've got a really good grip. I've tried to grip with my tweezers so that I'm not going to take a chunk of the embossing powder out as it melts. But yeah, that's another little way that you can do this. I do like to add 2 layers of embossing powder when I'm heat embossing small die cut elements like this, just so that you get a really good coverage and it really makes the powder shine, because you get all the different colours and the elements, you get really good coverage. So when it's nice and hot, you can just go ahead and tip some powder over the top of it, and then you'll be able to add that second layer without needing to go back to the ink pad. If you've let it cool, just simply go to the ink pad, ink your image back up again, and then coat it in powder and heat emboss again. So yeah, but find what works for you. There's lots of different ways that you could do this. These are just some of the ways that I find it works easier for me. I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment now before we add any dimension to the card. So this sentiment is from the Papercraft Society kit that I showed you at the beginning. It is an old one. It just says long time no see, and I've stamped it in VersaFine Clair Twilight ink, which is a lovely dark blue ink. And then here's the card blank that we did some ink blending on earlier, and I'm just going to stamp that shoal of fish using the Turquoise Sea ink from Gina K Designs. So now all of that stamping's done, we can go ahead and put our card together. So I've got some twine or some like burlap string, and I'm just trimming it down with my scissors, and I'm just going to go ahead and wrap that around the centre of the card. This is a great little hack to hide any of the lines that may have cut slightly below on when you die cut. So don't be worried if you've cut a little bit lower on one side over the other. This little bit of string will go ahead and hide any little blemishes. And of course you could wrap multiple layers of twine or string around here, or ribbon, whatever you've got in your stash. But I'm just going to use the one strip. I just kind of feel like it breaks up that white space a little bit. And then we can go ahead and pop some foam tape all around this panel as well. Now, I am going to leave the areas where the twine is, or the string, because I don't want any extra bulk in those areas. And obviously putting foam tape over the top of that is just going to add a little bit too much bulk. So to hold that in place, I'm going to add a little bit more red line tape over the top. And I'm just going to leave the backing paper over on the top of that on the back. We don't need to take that off. I'm going to go ahead now and remove the release paper from the foam tape, but in hindsight, it would have been better to have left that on until we'd finished messing around with all our placement, just because it made it a little bit more tricky to kind of hover it over the inked panel. So yeah, just a note, maybe don't remove that tape just right now, because then it made it tricky as I was lining up where I was going to put all my little sea creatures. So I'm playing around with the die cuts here. I'm just working out where I want all my placement to be. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to go ahead and add some quick grab glue to the back of it. I've just got some Cosmic Shimmer glue in these little bottles at the minute. So yeah, once that's all nice and stuck down, I've made sure, again, that these elements are going to show through that window. You want to make sure of that before you stick it down, because it's a lot easier to get it right the first time around than trying to peel off elements that you've glued on. Then I'm going to go ahead and add some of the glue to the foam tape, just so that I've got a little bit of wiggle room to make sure it's nice and straight. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bow using the same string, and I'm going to pop that over to the left hand side, and then I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape to the back of this seahorse and pop that up over the right hand side with the twine through the middle. So again, I'm leaving a little gap so that the twine can just fit through the middle of the foam tape, so that we don't have any extra bulk. I'm then going to add a few little dewdrops to finish, and then that will be the finished card for today. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the gorgeous new powders from Wow Embossing Powder. As always, all the products that I've used will be linked in the description box below. I'll add some close-up photos at the end of this video too. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.